What he saw next stopped him dead in his tracks. It wasn't what he had expected to find. There was no bag of candy, no misplaced toy, or even a hidden phone. Instead, it was a note, written in a hurried, almost frantic hand. "They're watching me. Help me." The words were scrawled across the paper in dark ink, and they sent a shiver down the bus driver's spine. But it didn't end there. There were more words beneath it, barely legible, as if they had been written in a rush. "Don't tell anyone. They'll know." The bus driver stood frozen for a moment, staring at the paper, his mind racing. Who was she talking about? Who was watching her? And why? The questions seemed to spiral in his mind, each one leading to more confusion. Emma had been keeping something from everyone, something dark and terrifying. Was it possible she was in some sort of danger? Or was this some kind of game? The note didn't make sense. But then again, nothing about Emma made sense either. Over the next few days, he kept his eyes on her even more closely, though without letting her know he was watching. He started to notice strange things that had always been right in front of him. For example, the way she glanced over her shoulder before getting on the bus, as though checking to make sure no one was following her. The way she held her backpack tightly, as if she was afraid to let it go. Even the way she quickly sat down in the back of the bus, never interacting with anyone else. It was all adding up to something far more sinister than he could have imagined. And yet, no one else seemed to notice anything. The other kids continued with their usual routines, oblivious to the strange behavior of the girl in the back. But there were other things too, things he couldn't quite explain. The sudden appearance of certain people in the neighborhood. People who didn't quite belong there, who seemed to be watching Emma from a distance. Were they just random strangers, or was there something more to them? He had seen them a few times at the bus stop, standing across the street, always in the background. And when he tried to make eye contact with them, they quickly looked away. It felt like they were avoiding him, or worse, trying to hide something. The whole situation was starting to unravel, and the bus driver wasn't sure if he was getting closer to the truth, or if he was just stepping deeper into a web of lies. The more he tried to piece things together, the more questions arose. Was Emma being followed? Was she involved in something that was far beyond the bus driver's understanding? And why was she so terrified of being found out? There was only one way to find out, and it was something the bus driver dreaded. He had to confront her. But would she tell him the truth, or would she shut him out once again? And if she did open up, what kind of secrets would she reveal? The days following the discovery of the note were filled with a sense of dread. The bus driver couldn't stop thinking about the cryptic message Emma had left hidden beneath the seat. It wasn't just a cry for help, it was a warning. But what was it really about? And who was watching her? The more he tried to connect the dots, the more things began to slip through his fingers. Each step forward seemed to be met with an unexpected barrier, as if something was actively trying to prevent him from uncovering the truth. It started with the disappearance of the note. The bus driver, still haunted by the words he had found, had carefully placed it in a folder, planning to show it to someone he trusted. He thought about taking it to the police, but the idea of involving authorities felt like opening a door to something far bigger than he was prepared to face. So, he kept the note with him, tucked away in his bag, deciding to observe Emma a bit more and see if he could get her to open up. But when he went to grab the note that afternoon, it was gone. Vanished without a trace. The folder had been untouched, yet the note had disappeared as though it had never existed at all. At first, he thought he might have misplaced it. Maybe it fell out. Maybe he had misplaced it in his car. But after searching everywhere, the note was gone. The more he thought about it, the more it felt deliberate. Someone had taken it, and they didn't want him to have it. But who? And why? The timing couldn't have been worse. He had just decided to approach Emma the next day, hoping she might finally open up about what had been going on. Now, without the note, he felt even more lost. His hunch was right, he wasn't just dealing with a confused and troubled girl. There was something far deeper at play. But who would go through his personal belongings and take a single piece of paper? Was someone trying to warn him to back off? Or was it possible that Emma herself had taken it? The thought that she might be hiding something even darker than he could imagine made his stomach twist in knots. But the disappearance of the note wasn't the only obstacle that was starting to block his way. On the morning after the note vanished, the bus driver noticed something unsettling. The same people he had seen standing around the bus stop were there again, lurking in the distance. He didn't recognize them, but there was something about their demeanor that made his skin crawl. One of them, a man who always wore sunglasses, even on cloudy days, was staring directly at the bus. It wasn't just a casual glance, it was as if he knew exactly what the bus driver was thinking. He quickly turned his eyes away, but the tension in the air was undeniable. It wasn't the first time he'd seen this man around, but it was the first time he had gotten such an odd feeling in his gut. The man didn't fit the neighborhood. He didn't belong. And yet, he kept showing up. Watching. Waiting. Still, the bus driver couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. That maybe the man, and the others with him, were involved in whatever secret Emma was wrapped up in. What if they were the ones who took the note? What if they knew exactly what the bus driver was up to? Every time he tried to get closer to the truth, it felt like more people were standing in his way. The more he observed, the more he realized how deep this could go. This wasn't just about Emma anymore. There were bigger forces at play, and he was becoming a part of something far more dangerous than he had imagined. Then, just when he thought things couldn't get any more complicated, a familiar face from his past appeared. It was his old friend, Rick, who he hadn't seen in years. Rick had been a good guy, someone he had worked with when he first started driving buses. They had kept in touch off and on, but nothing serious. Rick was known to be a bit of a wild card, always getting himself involved in things he probably shouldn't. The bus driver had heard rumors that Rick had gotten into some shady business, but he'd never thought much of it. That is, until Rick showed up at his door one evening, unannounced. "Hey, man," Rick greeted him with a half-smile, leaning against the doorframe like it was an old hangout. "I heard you were doing some investigating. Got some time for a chat?" The bus driver felt a knot form in his stomach. He hadn't told anyone what he was looking into, so how did Rick know? Rick's tone was casual, but there was a knowing glint in his eyes, one that made the bus driver uncomfortable. "You've been looking into that girl, haven't you? Emma, right?" The words hung in the air like a warning. It wasn't a question. Rick already knew. "You need to stop, man," Rick continued, his voice dropping to a serious tone that sent a chill down the bus driver's spine. "Whatever you think you know, just forget it. It's not worth it." For a moment, the bus driver just stared at him, confused. "What do you mean? What's going on with Emma? Why are you?" Rick held up his hand, cutting him off. "I can't explain it, but trust me on this one. There are things happening that you don't understand. And the more you dig, the deeper you'll get pulled into it. Just let it go." His words were forceful, almost as if he was trying to protect him, but there was something about his tone that didn't sit right. It was too urgent, too insistent. It felt like a warning, but why? Before the bus driver could respond, Rick turned and walked away without another word, leaving the door wide open. He didn't look back. Now the bus driver was more confused than ever. Rick's sudden appearance felt like an intervention, but why? What was he trying to protect him from? And what did Rick know about Emma's situation? The encounter left him more unsettled than ever, but it also pushed him into a corner. Was he being warned off because he was getting too close? Or was Rick genuinely trying to help him avoid something terrible? The questions kept swirling in his mind as he stood there, staring at the empty doorway. That night, as he lay in bed trying to piece together everything he had learned so far, he heard a strange noise outside his window. A soft tapping, like someone was knocking, except there was no one there when he looked. It was the kind of eerie, inexplicable moment that you could never shake. It was the feeling that someone, or something, was watching. And the more he tried to ignore it, the more it seemed like the shadows were getting closer. As the bus driver drifted off to sleep, one thing was certain: he was no longer in control of the situation. The deeper he dug, the more questions arose, and the more dangerous the answers seemed to become. Whoever was behind this was playing a game, and the bus driver was now an unwilling player in it. And as the night grew darker, one question remained on his mind: what was Emma hiding? As the bus driver tried to push the eerie events out of his mind, the tension seemed to tighten around him, like the walls were slowly closing in. Every step he took toward uncovering the truth about Emma's situation only seemed to deepen the mystery, and the deeper he went, the more everything seemed to unravel in unexpected ways. Just when he thought he might be getting closer, new pieces of the puzzle would slip through his fingers, and he'd find himself caught in an even bigger web than he'd anticipated. And it wasn't just him who was being pulled into this strange, shadowy world. The next morning, as he boarded the bus for his usual route, there was something different about the atmosphere. It wasn't just the usual unease he had been feeling, something more was at play. As he pulled up to the bus stop, he noticed his colleague, Sarah, standing there, waiting to get on. She was a fellow driver who had worked the same route for a few years, someone he trusted and had shared many conversations with over coffee in the break room. But today, she looked different. There was a heaviness about her, an almost palpable tension in her posture. Her usually bright smile was absent, replaced by a frown that seemed to weigh her down. It wasn't like Sarah to be so down, so out of sorts. But as she climbed onto the bus, she didn't say a word. At first, the bus driver thought nothing of it. He chalked it up to her just having a rough morning. After all, everyone has their bad days. But as the ride continued, he began to notice the little things, the way Sarah kept looking over her shoulder, glancing around as if she was expecting someone to show up. The way her hands gripped the bus railing a little too tightly. He knew her well enough to recognize when something was off, and right now, Sarah was definitely not herself. When they reached the next stop and the students were getting off, Sarah stood still for a moment, staring out of the window. She was lost in thought, her eyes clouded with something he couldn't place. That's when he noticed it, the same piece of folded paper sticking out of the back pocket of her jacket. His heart skipped a beat. He had seen that paper before. It was exactly like the note Emma had left under the bus seat. Without thinking, the bus driver reached out and asked her, almost impulsively, "Sarah, what's going on? Are you okay?" She blinked at him as if coming out of a trance, her gaze briefly flicking to the note in her pocket before she looked away. "I'm fine," she replied quickly, but the words felt forced, empty. She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. The bus driver wasn't convinced. "I've seen that paper before," he said, his voice low but firm. "Where did you get it?" At first, Sarah's face flushed, and she took a step back, as though startled by his question. She glanced around quickly, making sure no one else was paying attention, then leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. "You need to stop. I don't know what you're getting yourself into, but I've been warned. You don't want to go any further. Believe me." The warning felt like a punch to his gut. He had no idea what was going on, but now it was clear that Sarah knew more than she was letting on. What had she been warned about? Who was warning her? And why was she involved in this? The bus driver's thoughts raced, but before he could press her for more information, Sarah quickly pulled away and walked off the bus, leaving him standing there with more questions than answers. Later that day, when the bus driver sat down to reflect on what had just happened, the pieces of the puzzle started to shift in a way he hadn't expected. The fact that Sarah, someone he trusted, was in possession of the same note made things even murkier. Was she connected to whatever Emma was involved in? Had she been lying to him all this time, or was she simply too scared to speak up? And why did she tell him to stop? Was she trying to protect him, or was there something even darker lurking behind her words? As the days passed, the bus driver began to notice more signs that things were spiraling out of control. He had assumed he was investigating Emma's situation alone, but now it felt like there were hidden forces at play, pulling strings behind the scenes. Sarah wasn't the only one who seemed to be acting strangely. He started to notice odd behavior from other people, small, seemingly inconsequential things that, when pieced together, hinted at something much bigger. The man in sunglasses who had been watching the bus from a distance was now showing up even more frequently, always lurking in the background. But he wasn't the only one. Another figure had appeared, a woman, always in dark clothes, always standing just outside the school, her eyes fixed on Emma. It wasn't just coincidence anymore, it was like a game of cat and mouse, and the bus driver had unknowingly stepped right into the middle of it. One afternoon, after dropping off the last group of kids, the bus driver decided to confront Sarah again. He knew she was the key to understanding what was going on, and he couldn't let her slip away. But when he arrived at her house, It wasn't just Sarah who answered the door. The words hung in the air like a warning. It wasn't a question. Rick already knew. "You need to stop, man," Rick continued, his voice dropping to a serious tone that sent a chill down the bus driver's spine. "Whatever you think you know, just forget it. It's not worth it." For a moment, the bus driver just stared at him, confused. "What do you mean? What's going on with Emma? Why are you?" Rick held up his hand, cutting him off. "I can't explain it, but trust me on this one. There are things happening that you don't understand. And the more you dig, the deeper you'll get pulled into it. Just let it go." His words were forceful, almost as if he was trying to protect him, but there was something about his tone that didn't sit right. It was too urgent, too insistent. It felt like a warning, but why? Before the bus driver could respond, Rick turned and walked away without another word, leaving the door wide open. He didn't look back. Now the bus driver was more confused than ever. Rick's sudden appearance felt like an intervention, but why? What was he trying to protect him from? And what did Rick know about Emma's situation? The encounter left him more unsettled than ever, but it also pushed him into a corner. Was he being warned off because he was getting too close? Or was Rick genuinely trying to help him avoid something terrible? The questions kept swirling in his mind as he stood there, staring at the empty doorway. That night, as he lay in bed trying to piece together everything he had learned so far, he heard a strange noise outside his window. A soft tapping, like someone was knocking, except there was no one there when he looked. It was the kind of eerie, inexplicable moment that you could never shake. It was the feeling that someone, or something, was watching. And the more he tried to ignore it, the more it seemed like the shadows were getting closer. As the bus driver drifted off to sleep, one thing was certain: he was no longer in control of the situation. The deeper he dug, the more questions arose, and the more dangerous the answers seemed to become. Whoever was behind this was playing a game, and the bus driver was now an unwilling player in it. And as the night grew darker, one question remained on his mind: what was Emma hiding? As the bus driver tried to push the eerie events out of his mind, the tension seemed to tighten around him, like the walls were slowly closing in. Every step he took toward uncovering the truth about Emma's situation only seemed to deepen the mystery, and the deeper he went, the more everything seemed to unravel in unexpected ways. Just when he thought he might be getting closer, new pieces of the puzzle would slip through his fingers, and he'd find himself caught in an even bigger web than he'd anticipated. And it wasn't just him who was being pulled into this strange, shadowy world. The next morning, as he boarded the bus for his usual route, there was something different about the atmosphere. It wasn't just the usual unease he had been feeling, something more was at play. As he pulled up to the bus stop, he noticed his colleague, Sarah, standing there, waiting to get on. She was a fellow driver who had worked the same route for a few years, someone he trusted and had shared many conversations with over coffee in the break room. But today, she looked different. There was a heaviness about her, an almost palpable tension in her posture. Her usually bright smile was absent, replaced by a frown that seemed to weigh her down. It wasn't like Sarah to be so down, so out of sorts. But as she climbed onto the bus, she didn't say a word. At first, the bus driver thought nothing of it. He chalked it up to her just having a rough morning. After all, everyone has their bad days. But as the ride continued, he began to notice the little things: the way Sarah kept looking over her shoulder, glancing around as if she was expecting someone to show up. The way her hands gripped the bus railing a little too tightly. He knew her well enough to recognize when something was off, and right now, Sarah was definitely not herself. When they reached the next stop and the students were getting off, Sarah stood still for a moment, staring out of the window. She was lost in thought, her eyes clouded with something he couldn't place. That's when he noticed it, the same piece of folded paper sticking out of the back pocket of her jacket. His heart skipped a beat. He had seen that paper before. It was exactly like the note Emma had left under the bus seat. Without thinking, the bus driver reached out and asked her, almost impulsively, "Sarah, what's going on? Are you okay?" She blinked at him as if coming out of a trance, her gaze briefly flicking to the note in her pocket before she looked away. "I'm fine," she replied quickly, but the words felt forced, empty. She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. The bus driver wasn't convinced. "I've seen that paper before," he said, his voice low but firm. "Where did you get it?" At first, Sarah's face flushed, and she took a step back, as though startled by his question. She glanced around quickly, making sure no one else was paying attention, then leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. "You need to stop. I don't know what you're getting yourself into, but I've been warned. You don't want to go any further. Believe me." The warning felt like a punch to his gut. He had no idea what was going on, but now it was clear that Sarah knew more than she was letting on. What had she been warned about? Who was warning her? And why was she involved in this? The bus driver's thoughts raced, but before he could press her for more information, Sarah quickly pulled away and walked off the bus, leaving him standing there with more questions than answers. Later that day, when the bus driver sat down to reflect on what had just happened, the pieces of the puzzle started to shift in a way he hadn't expected. The fact that Sarah, someone he trusted, was in possession of the same note made things even murkier. Was she connected to whatever Emma was involved in? Had she been lying to him all this time, or was she simply too scared to speak up? And why did she tell him to stop? Was she trying to protect him, or was there something even darker lurking behind her words? As the days passed, the bus driver began to notice more signs that things were spiraling out of control. He had assumed he was investigating Emma's situation alone, but now it felt like there were hidden forces at play, pulling strings behind the scenes. Sarah wasn't the only one who seemed to be acting strangely. He started to notice odd behavior from other people, small, seemingly inconsequential things that, when pieced together, hinted at something much bigger. The man in sunglasses who had been watching the bus from a distance was now showing up even more frequently, always lurking in the background. But he wasn't the only one. Another figure had appeared, a woman, always in dark clothes, always standing just outside the school, her eyes fixed on Emma. It wasn't just coincidence anymore, it was like a game of cat and mouse, and the bus driver had unknowingly stepped right into the middle of it. One afternoon, after dropping off the last group of kids, the bus driver decided to confront Sarah again. He knew she was the key to understanding what was going on, and he couldn't let her slip away. But when he arrived at her house, it wasn't just Sarah who answered the door. Standing next to her, looking almost menacing, was a tall man the bus driver didn't recognize. His eyes were cold and calculating, and there was something about the way he stood there blocking the door, a silent threat in his posture that made the bus driver take a step back. "What do you want?" the man asked, his voice low, barely audible. "I just want to talk to Sarah," the bus driver replied, trying to keep his voice steady, despite the sense of danger now radiating from the man. But Sarah stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "You need to leave," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "I told you to stay away from this. You don't know what you're messing with." The bus driver's heart pounded in his chest. Was she threatening him now? Was this man part of whatever secret Sarah had been hiding? The unease in the air was palpable, like a storm waiting to break. "What is going on, Sarah?" he asked, his voice shaking. "I don't understand. What's happening with Emma? Why is everyone so scared?" Sarah's face hardened, and for a moment, he thought she was going to tell him the truth. But instead, she shook her head. "You don't want to know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Just let it go. For your own sake." Before the bus driver could respond, the man stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder and pushing him gently but firmly away from the door. "This is your last warning," he said, his voice colder than ever. "Stay away from Sarah, stay away from Emma, and forget everything you've seen. Or else, things are going to get a lot worse for you." As the door slammed shut, the bus driver stood frozen on the porch, the weight of their words pressing down on him. His mind raced, but one thought lingered: the deeper he went into this mystery, the more dangerous it became. Someone was trying to protect something hidden, and it was clear now that he was being pushed away for a reason. But why? And what did Sarah and this mysterious man know that he didn't? As the bus driver walked back to his car, the night felt heavier, darker, and more suffocating than it ever had before. The web of lies and secrets was thicker than ever, and with every step he took, it felt like someone, or something, was always just one step ahead. The bus driver couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. The warning from Sarah, the strange man, and the cryptic messages all seemed to form a pattern, but the deeper he delved into it, the more he felt like he was being pulled into a nightmare he couldn't escape. Every time he thought he had a grasp on the situation, new, unexpected events left him more confused and terrified. The walls, both literal and metaphorical, were closing in on him, and no matter how much he tried to get out of the web that had been spun around him, he couldn't. The first sign that things were about to take a darker turn came late one evening when he received a phone call. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it set his nerves on edge. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady, but he could already feel the weight of the call pressing down on him. There was silence on the other end for a moment, and just when he thought the call might have been a wrong number, a voice spoke, a cold, distorted voice, like it was filtered through a machine. "Stop asking questions. Stop looking into Emma. If you don't, we'll make sure it's the last mistake you ever make." The words were sharp and final, like a threat he couldn't ignore. The voice didn't give him a chance to respond, and just like that, the line went dead. His pulse raced, his heart hammering in his chest as he stared at the phone in his hand. That wasn't a warning. It was a promise. Panic began to settle in. He'd been warned before, but this time it was different. The tone of the voice, the way they spoke with such finality, it was clear that whoever was behind this wasn't messing around. They knew everything about him. They knew he had been snooping around, trying to figure out what was going on with Emma. And they were telling him, in no uncertain terms, to back off. But the bus driver couldn't walk away now. He was too far in. The fear gnawed at him, yes, but it was the burning need to understand the truth, to uncover the mystery that had consumed him, that kept him from turning back. His mind raced with possibilities. Was it Emma herself who had sent the message? Or was it someone else entirely? Someone even darker, more dangerous than he had imagined. The next morning, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was a strange, unsettling sensation, like invisible eyes were following his every move. As he drove his route, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He glanced in the rearview mirror more times than necessary, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. Still, the sense of danger lingered like a shadow, creeping up behind him, just waiting to pounce. But it wasn't until later that day, when he got home, that everything started to fall apart. The front door was slightly ajar, as though someone had forced it open, and the unsettling feeling he had carried with him all day grew into a rush of cold dread. His heart skipped a beat as he slowly stepped inside, calling out, "Hello?" But there was no answer. His pulse quickened. His house was supposed to be a safe haven, but now it felt like a trap. He scanned the living room, and that's when he noticed it. The picture frame on the coffee table had been moved. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make his stomach twist. It wasn't just out of place, it was as if someone had deliberately touched it. His gaze moved to the kitchen, where he noticed the same unsettling signs, things slightly moved, a cup out of place, a drawer left open. It was clear someone had been there. And they hadn't just been looking around, they were searching for something. A chill ran through him as he moved cautiously down the hallway, his mind racing with possibilities. Was someone trying to send him a message? Were they looking for the information he had on Emma? He reached the bedroom, and his worst fear came true. The place had been ransacked. Drawers were open, clothes were thrown everywhere, and his personal items were scattered around in disarray. Whoever had been in his house wasn't just sending a message, they were looking for something specific, something he had, or something they thought he had. The file with Emma's note, the one he had kept so carefully hidden, was gone. A cold, empty feeling settled in his chest. It was no longer just about Emma anymore. Someone was trying to silence him, trying to stop him from uncovering the truth. A long pause stretched between them. For a moment, the silence seemed to scream louder than the words she had yet to speak. Finally, Sarah's voice broke the tension again, but this time, it wasn't the same voice he had come to know. It was different, more calculated, colder. "You really don't get it, do you?" she asked, her words dripping with something far darker than he had ever imagined. "I'm not trying to protect you. I'm trying to protect them." The bus driver's blood ran cold. His mind spun as everything he thought he understood shattered in an instant. What did she mean? What was she talking about? Protect them. Who were they, and why was Sarah, someone he thought he could trust, now speaking as if she was part of something much bigger, something far more sinister? Before he could respond, the line went dead. His heart pounded as his thoughts raced, but they didn't make sense anymore. The pieces that had once fit together, Sarah's warnings, the cryptic messages, the people following him, all pointed to something much more complex than a simple mystery of a crying girl. It wasn't just about Emma anymore. It wasn't even just about him. The entire situation had spiraled out of control in ways he couldn't have foreseen, and now, he had no idea who to trust, or who he was even up against. His thoughts turned back to the note, the one Emma had left behind, the one that seemed to have started this entire mess. What if that wasn't just a cry for help? What if it was something else, something far more deliberate? What if Emma wasn't the victim, but a player in a much larger game, and everything that had happened was part of a plan? Had he been chasing a phantom the whole time? What if Sarah wasn't just caught up in this, but actively playing a part in it, orchestrating his every move? Suddenly, it all clicked. The mysterious figures watching him, the threats, the disappearing notes, it wasn't just about someone hiding a secret or keeping Emma's story buried. It was a much bigger conspiracy, one that stretched far beyond anything he had imagined. And it was clear now, he wasn't supposed to figure it out. He wasn't supposed to learn the truth. The panic hit him harder than ever before. As the realization sank in, he felt the heavy weight of dread wash over him like a flood. There was a purpose to everything that had been happening to him, a plan he had unwittingly stepped into. He wasn't just a bus driver who stumbled upon a mystery, he had been part of the plan from the beginning. But what was the plan? Who was behind it? And most importantly, who could he trust? He was still trying to make sense of everything when he heard it, a knock on his door. His heart skipped, and without thinking, he rushed toward the door, his mind racing, unsure if the person on the other side was friend or foe. When he opened it, there stood a figure he hadn't expected. It wasn't Sarah. It wasn't even someone he recognized at first. It was Emma. But this wasn't the same girl he'd seen on the bus, the one who had seemed so fragile and lost. This was someone entirely different. She stood in front of him, her eyes cold, calculating, and filled with a darkness he hadn't seen before. "Are you ready to hear the truth?" she asked, her voice low and smooth, as though she had rehearsed these words 1,000 times. "Because everything you've been trying to figure out, it's all been a lie. And now, you've become part of it." The bus driver's mind raced, and the weight of what Emma had just revealed crushed him. He stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the girl who, only moments ago, had seemed like nothing more than a victim in a twisted, unfolding mystery. But now, with her cold gaze and calculated demeanor, it was clear that everything he thought he knew was wrong. The entire situation, the cryptic messages, the strange threats, the ever-present shadows, it had all led him here, to this moment, standing face to face with the girl who had somehow been playing him all along. His pulse pounded in his chest as the tension swelled in the air between them, thick and suffocating. His hands trembled at his sides, but he couldn't move. Every instinct told him to run, to get away before things got even worse. But where could he go? How could he escape when the truth had become a labyrinth of deceit, betrayal, and lies? Emma didn't wait for him to respond. "You really don't understand, do you?" she asked, her voice calm and detached, as if the chaos surrounding them wasn't as important as what she was about to say. "You're caught in the middle of something far bigger than you. And now, you're involved whether you like it or not. It's too late to turn back." She stepped forward, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his stomach drop. "You thought you were just trying to help me. But you've been digging into things that were never meant to be uncovered." The words echoed in his mind as he struggled to process what she was telling him. He had been doing what felt right, following a gut instinct to uncover the truth. But now, it was clear that truth was not what he had imagined. Was it even worth finding out anymore? What was the cost of knowing too much? The walls seemed to close in, and with every passing second, he felt more and more suffocated by the choices now hanging in the balance. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked, a mix of betrayal and disbelief. "Why lead me down this path if you were part of it all along? Why get me involved?" Emma's expression softened just for a moment, as if a flicker of regret passed through her before she quickly masked it again. Because I didn't have a choice. No one has a choice in this. There it was again. The words that haunted him. No one has a choice. The implication was clear. They were all being controlled by forces much larger than they realized, and it was too late to fight back. His thoughts spun out of control, and before he could stop himself, he blurted out the question that had been haunting him since the first day he started looking into this. What do you want from me? Emma's eyes narrowed. It's not about what I want. It's about what they want. And then she dropped the bombshell that shattered everything he thought he understood. You're being watched right now. They're tracking every move you make. Every phone call you've had, every decision you've made. Everything. But the worst part is, they know what you'll do next. They know you're already planning to confront Sarah, don't you? The words hit him like a slap in the face. He froze. Confront Sarah? She had been part of this, hadn't she? He had trusted her. He had believed her when she said she was trying to protect him, but now it seemed like she had been manipulating him all along, playing a part in a larger game that he couldn't even begin to comprehend. As if sensing his inner turmoil, Emma continued, her tone colder now, more calculated. You can confront Sarah. You can demand the truth from her. But that's where the choice becomes real. If you go to her, if you keep digging, you'll have to decide whether you want to live to see the truth or if you want to survive long enough to regret it. Her gaze flickered to the shadows behind him, and he could almost feel the invisible eyes watching him, waiting for him to make his move. Because if you go to Sarah, they'll make sure you don't get what you want. They'll make sure you never get out of this alive. The air seemed to thicken, suffocating him as he realized what she was implying. It wasn't just about finding the truth anymore. It was about survival. He was up against something so powerful, so entrenched, that uncovering the truth could cost him everything, and more importantly, it could cost him the people he cared about. Could he even trust anyone anymore? Could he trust Emma, who stood before him now, playing her part in this twisted game? Was she trying to save him or drag him deeper into the chaos? As the silence stretched between them, Emma's expression shifted again. For the briefest moment, there was a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes, a hint that maybe she, too, was caught in a web that she didn't know how to escape. But it was gone before he could fully grasp it. You'll get one shot at this, Emma said, stepping back, her voice quiet but firm. You'll confront Sarah, but know this, no matter what you decide, you won't walk away from this unscathed. You'll lose something. You'll lose someone. But the choice is yours. Before he could respond, she turned on her heel and walked away into the darkness, leaving him standing alone, his mind spinning with the weight of her words. His heart pounded as the sense of urgency grew. The stakes had never been higher, and now, he was faced with an impossible decision, one that would change everything. Confront Sarah and risk his own life, or walk away from the truth and live with the torment of never knowing what happened to Emma, to all the others who had been caught in the crossfire. The darkness around him seemed to close in even tighter as he tried to catch his breath, knowing that no matter which choice he made, the consequences would haunt him forever. His phone buzzed again, breaking the silence like a gunshot. The screen lit up with a message from an unknown number, the words simple but chilling, "You've been warned. Don't make a move." The bus driver stared at the message for what felt like an eternity, the reality of the situation sinking in. He had no way out now. No matter what, his life was never going to be the same again. Every step forward would be a step into the unknown, and every decision would carry the weight of consequences that were beyond his control. What would he choose? Would he face the truth, risking everything, or would he walk away, protecting his own safety at the cost of never knowing the answers he so desperately craved? The next few hours felt like an eternity as the bus driver stood in the silence of his apartment, the message on his phone still glowing in front of him. His mind raced, each thought louder than the next, until he couldn't tell where one ended and another began. Don't make a move. The words echoed in his head like a drumbeat, a warning he couldn't shake off. He knew it now, whatever this was, whatever had been happening to him, it was bigger than he could have ever imagined. Emma had been right about one thing, he wasn't just caught up in a small, twisted mystery anymore. He was tangled in a conspiracy that reached farther, dug deeper, and involved far more people than he could have ever fathomed. And every moment he hesitated only seemed to drag him deeper into the darkness. His mind flashed back to everything that had happened, every twist and turn, and suddenly, the puzzle pieces began falling into place, just not in the way he had imagined. The threats, the warnings, the shadows that had been following him for days, they weren't just part of some random attack. They were part of something orchestrated, something planned out far in advance. The girl on the bus, Emma, had been part of it all along. But she wasn't the only one. He had been trusting people, thinking they were on his side, but now he saw the truth. There were no sides, no allies. Just people with their own hidden agendas, using him to get what they wanted. The phone buzzed again, and without thinking, he grabbed it, his heart pounding. It was from Sarah. His breath caught as he swiped to open the message, praying it was something, anything, that would give him the answers he needed. Instead, the screen lit up with a single line of text that turned his world upside down. "They know about you. You're not safe anymore. Get out." He stared at the message, his breath shallow. Sarah had been warning him for days, trying to protect him, but now he realized she had been a part of this from the start. She had known more than she had let on. The trust he had placed in her was a lie. Everything about this, everything about the people he thought were his friends, was a lie. His gut twisted as he thought about how close they had all been, how easy it had been for him to fall into their trap. Then, without warning, the door to his apartment slammed open. The sudden noise made him jump, his heart racing. He didn't even need to turn around to know who it was. He had felt it coming. Someone had found him, and now he was face to face with the very people who had been pulling the strings all along. Standing in the doorway was not Sarah. It was a man, a tall figure in a dark suit, his face expressionless, his eyes cold. Behind him, two other men stepped into the room, their presence heavy, threatening. They didn't speak at first, just stood there, sizing him up. He could feel the weight of their gaze like a physical force. These were no ordinary men. These were operatives. And they weren't here to talk. The man in the front finally spoke, his voice low and commanding. "You've made a mistake, and now you're going to pay for it." The bus driver's heart skipped. There it was, the truth he had been trying to avoid. They had been following him all along. They were everywhere, watching his every move. But who were they? What did they want from him? His mind was racing, but there was no time to make sense of it. The stakes were higher now. There was no turning back. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice shaky but defiant. The man in the suit didn't flinch. "We're the ones who run things. You've been digging in places you shouldn't have. And now, you've crossed a line." A sick feeling crawled up the bus driver's spine as the words sunk in. They ran things. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just a few bad people hiding secrets, this was an entire network, a shadowy organization with power and influence over everything. His mind whirled as he tried to connect the dots. They had orchestrated everything, the mysterious messages, the strange encounters, the warnings, even Emma's role in it. It was all part of a larger plan. And he had been the pawn in their game, a pawn who had just gone rogue. One of the men behind the leader stepped forward, and without warning, grabbed the bus driver by the arm, pulling him toward the door. This wasn't just a few bad people hiding secrets, this was an entire network, a shadowy organization with power and influence over everything. His mind whirled as he tried to connect the dots. They had orchestrated everything, the mysterious messages, the strange encounters, the warnings, even Emma's role in it. It was all part of a larger plan. And he had been the pawn in their game, a pawn who had just gone rogue. One of the men behind the leader stepped forward, and without warning, grabbed the bus driver by the arm, pulling him toward the door. "We're taking you in," the man said, his grip ironclad. He tried to pull away, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. He wasn't just being watched now, he was the target. "I won't go with you," he spat, desperation creeping into his voice. But it was no use. The man tightened his hold, dragging him toward the exit. The bus driver's mind was in overdrive. There had to be a way out. There had to be something, anything, that could stop this. And then it hit him, a flash of memory from earlier, when Emma had warned him about making a move. "You won't walk away from this unscathed. He had thought she meant physically, but now he understood. This was bigger than his own life. This was about everything he had uncovered and everything they wanted to keep hidden. The leader of the group, still standing in the doorway, watched him struggle with a knowing look in his eyes. "You really don't get it, do you?" the man said, almost pityingly. "You're not going to stop us. You're not even close. Everything you've done has only pushed you further into our hands. You've given us no choice but to eliminate the problem. And now, you are the problem." The bus driver's heart raced. Eliminate the problem. He felt the weight of those words settle like lead in his stomach. This wasn't just about keeping him quiet anymore, it was about ending him. They had no intention of letting him walk away. Not now. Not after everything he had uncovered. He couldn't breathe. His mind was spiraling, his thoughts all jumbled as he tried to think of a way out. He had to act. Now. But how? Just as the men began to pull him out the door, he saw something in the corner of his eye, a flicker of movement from across the street. He froze. A figure was standing in the shadows, watching him. Someone was out there. Someone had been waiting for the right moment. And suddenly, in the chaos of the moment, it hit him, this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about the people who had been pulled into this web, who were fighting against this shadowy organization. Sarah. Emma. He couldn't do this alone. He had to fight back, and somehow, he had to find a way to expose them before it was too late. But with every step the men took, every second that passed, the reality of his situation set in. The conspiracy was far larger, far more dangerous than he had ever anticipated. And if he didn't act fast, there wouldn't be anyone left to save. The stakes had never been higher, and as the men dragged him toward the unknown, he realized one undeniable truth: time was running out. The night had swallowed the city whole, its dark, empty streets stretching like veins beneath the harsh glow of streetlights. Every step the bus driver took felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of everything that had happened was settling in his bones. His chest tightened with every breath, and yet, his determination only grew. They thought they had him. They thought they had won. But he knew now that they had underestimated him. They had made one fatal mistake. They had left him with just enough space to fight back. The men who had been dragging him had finally stopped, ushering him into an abandoned warehouse hidden deep within the industrial district, away from prying eyes. The moment the doors slammed shut behind him, he knew this was it. There was no turning back. He had come too far. He was deep in enemy territory now, surrounded by shadows and a feeling of finality that settled in the pit of his stomach. But in the back of his mind, he could hear Emma's warning again: "You won't walk away from this unscathed." He had to make sure the sacrifice was worth it. He had to make sure he didn't lose the truth to the darkness that was threatening to swallow him whole. The leader of the group stepped forward, his face as cold and emotionless as ever. "This is where it ends for you," the man said, his voice smooth like velvet, but heavy with an unspoken threat. "You've been too much of a problem, too much of a risk. You've uncovered things that were never meant to see the light of day. And now, you're going to pay the price." The bus driver's heart pounded, and though his hands were bound, he clenched his fists in defiance. This wasn't the end. Not yet. He had one last move to make. The man's eyes bored into him, the intensity of his gaze almost palpable. "You're probably wondering who's behind all of this. Who's been pulling the strings. The ones who've been watching you. Who you've trusted." The bus driver's mind flashed to the faces he thought he knew: Sarah, Emma, the people he thought were his allies. "Well," the man continued, his lips curling into a faint smile, "it's time for you to learn the truth." The door behind the man opened suddenly, and the bus driver froze. Sarah stepped into the room, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red, like she had been crying. His stomach twisted in knots. It was her. She was here, but it wasn't the reunion he had hoped for. It was the final piece of the puzzle that he hadn't seen coming. She wasn't the victim. She was part of the conspiracy all along. "I tried to warn you," Sarah said, her voice trembling, "but there was something else there. Something cold, something calculating. I tried to protect you, but you wouldn't listen. You wouldn't stop digging." His heart sank as the truth hit him like a punch to the gut. Everything that had happened, the strange messages, the warnings, the cryptic phone calls, they had all been a carefully orchestrated game to lead him here. He wasn't just an innocent bystander, he was the target, the pawn in a game that had been set in motion long before he even stepped on that bus. Sarah walked closer, her eyes never leaving his. This was always about control. Power. It was never about you, not really. You were just a part of the bigger picture. The one piece we needed to complete the puzzle. His breath caught in his throat. What puzzle? He whispered, unable to comprehend what he was hearing. The one that would change everything, she said, her voice almost empty of emotion now. The one that would bring down the system, the one that would give us control. All of this, she waved a hand around the room, it's part of a plan that's been years in the making. And you, well, you were always going to be part of it. The only thing we didn't plan for was your obsession with finding the truth. He felt the cold realization creep over him, filling him with dread. They weren't just trying to protect a secret. They were trying to bring the whole system to its knees. And in doing so, they had been willing to sacrifice everything. Everyone. I thought you cared about me, he said, his voice breaking. His mind struggled to catch up with the truth. How could he have been so blind? You let me think you were on my side. Sarah's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. I did care. In the beginning. But things change. People change. And in the end, survival is what matters. The rest is just noise. The words felt like a slap to the face. He had been so consumed with the idea of uncovering the truth, with finding out what had happened to Emma, that he had missed the most obvious clue of all. Sarah was a part of it. She had always been a part of it. The man in the suit stepped forward again, his presence looming over the bus driver. This was never about you, either. It was always about control. We know everything about you. Your habits. Your weaknesses. And now, you're just another casualty in a much larger war. The bus driver's mind raced. He had to act. He had to do something before it was too late. His gaze shifted, and his eyes locked on the shadows near the back of the room. There, just barely visible, was a small, unmarked package on a wooden table. The same table where they had been discussing the plan. His heart stopped for a second. The final piece. The one thing they hadn't counted on, the truth they had tried so hard to keep buried. Without thinking, he lunged for it. The men moved toward him instantly, but it was too late. His fingers grasped the edge of the package and, with one quick, desperate motion, he tore it open. Inside, a stack of documents, blackmail records, coded messages, photos, financial transactions, everything he had been searching for. Everything that could expose them for who they really were. Before the men could reach him, he shoved the papers into his jacket, his heart pounding, knowing this was his only chance. He wasn't going down without a fight. Not now. Not when the truth was so close. Sarah's face twisted with fury. You think you can stop this, she hissed. You think you can bring us down with that? You have no idea what you're up against. But he didn't care about her words anymore. The pieces were in place. He knew what he had to do. The leader of the group lunged at him, but with a burst of adrenaline, the bus driver shoved him aside, making a break for the door. He was running now, but he wasn't just running from them. He was running toward the truth, toward the world that would finally see what had been happening in the shadows. He could hear the men yelling behind him, the sound of footsteps closing in, but he didn't stop. Not even when they shouted threats or when the darkness outside felt like it might swallow him whole. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. And as he sprinted into the night, the realization hit him, this wasn't just about survival. It was about saving everyone. The conspiracy was far bigger than he had ever imagined, and no matter what it took, he was going to bring it all to light. He wasn't done yet. And neither were they. The days following the chase felt like a blur. The bus driver had run, kept running, and when the dawn finally broke, it was a different world. The adrenaline that had carried him through the last few hours slowly ebbed away, leaving only exhaustion and a strange sense of emptiness. The papers he had stolen, the damning evidence he clutched so tightly, had found their way to the right hands an investigative journalist he trusted, someone who had been monitoring the conspiracy for years. The pieces of the puzzle, now laid out in front of the world, exposed the true scope of the operation. It wasn't just one organization, it was a vast network of corrupt individuals at every level, and their influence stretched across government, business, and even law enforcement. The revelations sent shockwaves through the city and beyond, leading to a wave of arrests, a public outcry, and a much-needed reckoning. But for the bus driver, for him, it felt hollow. He'd spent so long fighting to uncover the truth, to expose the lies that had controlled so many lives, but now that the truth was out, it wasn't the sense of victory he had expected. Instead, he felt like he had been stripped bare, exposed not just to the world, but to himself. The girl on the bus, Emma, was still nowhere to be found. He had hoped that by unraveling the conspiracy, she would be freed from whatever dark forces had been using her, but the deeper he dug, the more complicated the mystery became. The last time he had seen her, she had been a pawn, a reluctant participant in something much bigger than herself, and he realized that her involvement might have been more complex than he could ever understand. The authorities had found nothing that could point to her whereabouts, and his gut told him that she wasn't just lost in the system, she was out there, hiding, waiting for the right moment to resurface. But for now, there was silence. The storm had passed, but its echoes were still ringing in his mind. The weight of everything he had gone through, the betrayals, the threats, the danger, it all left him feeling like an empty shell. No matter how much had been uncovered, no matter how many lives had been changed, it couldn't bring back what he had lost along the way. The bus driver wasn't sure if peace was even possible anymore. How could it be, when his mind was filled with the faces of everyone who had been caught in the web of this conspiracy, Sarah, who had disappeared into the shadows, Emma, who had faded from his grasp, and all the others whose lives had been ruined in the name of power and control? He hadn't just lost a sense of normalcy, he had lost trust in everything and everyone around him. And though the conspiracy had crumbled, he realized that he might never truly escape the ghosts of what had happened. As he sat alone in his apartment, staring out at the city skyline, a sudden thought crossed his mind. He had been running for so long, trying to uncover the truth, but now that it was all out in the open, what came next? The weight of the answers he had fought so hard to find had left him paralyzed. It wasn't just the conspiracy that had been dismantled, it was his entire perception of the world, of everything he had thought was real. The lies had crumbled, but in their place, something much darker and more uncertain had taken root. The question that lingered in his mind, that gnawed at him as the days passed, was whether or not the fight was truly over. Could anything ever truly be over in a world where power and corruption ran so deep? And then, as if on cue, there was a knock at the door. The bus driver froze, his heart pounding, unsure of what to expect. His first instinct was to ignore it, to pretend he hadn't heard, but something inside him told him not to. He stood up slowly, his hands still trembling from the memories of everything he had been through, and opened the door just a crack. And there, standing in the doorway, was a woman he hadn't seen in weeks, Emma. Her eyes were wide, but there was a quiet strength in them, something different from the frightened girl he had once known. She was older now, in more ways than one. The moment their eyes met, it was as if the weight of everything that had happened came crashing down on him, but there was something in the way she looked at him that made him feel seen. Like for the first time in a long time, the fog had cleared, and he could finally understand that everything he had been through hadn't been for nothing. She was here. She was alive. "Are you okay?" he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped forward, crossing the threshold and into his apartment. The door clicked shut behind her with a finality that echoed in the silence of the room. Emma didn't need to say a word. Her presence was enough. And in that moment, despite everything that had happened, despite all the darkness they had both endured, he realized that there was still hope. There was still something worth fighting for. But as they sat together, trying to piece together what had led them here, there was a lingering tension in the air. Because the truth was, even though the conspiracy had been exposed, there was still something unsettling about the way the world had reacted to it all. People were arrested, sure, but how much had truly changed? How deep did the corruption run? And more importantly, who had been pulling the strings behind the strings they had already uncovered? As the night stretched on, and they spoke in quiet tones about the events that had led them to this point, the bus driver couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end, not for him, not for Emma, and certainly not for the shadowy network that still lurked in the dark corners of the world. The story might have reached its conclusion for now, but there was something just beyond the horizon, something that would change everything once again. And as he looked at Emma, her tired eyes finally locking with his, he understood one undeniable truth: the fight for the truth was never truly over. It was always evolving, always waiting, always lurking, just out of reach. He could feel it in his bones. Something was coming. And when it did, they would be ready. The bus driver's breath caught in his throat as his mind raced to comprehend the full weight of her words. Emma wasn't the innocent victim he had thought her to be. She was in this, and she was far deeper than he could have imagined. And now, as the pieces of the puzzle fell away, the most terrifying question of all remained: who was she really working for?